Technical remote viewing is a scientifically repeatable problem-solving process done by a person to gain information about a specific target, a person, place, thing, or event, anywhere in time, past, present, or future.
This tape is the PRV intermediate skills. That's what we're learning here today. But I do want to review some of the basics. What do I mean by the basics? The basic is technical remote viewing is a skill. It's not meant to be an experience. It's an attention management skill. When we remote view, when we engage in a remote viewing session, about 45 minutes in duration, we want to try to construct an environment that lends itself toward the remote viewing process. So try to find a place where you're not disturbed for not be disturbed for 45 minutes. There's something else that's important in a remote viewing session, and that is this. There are things that we call physical inclemencies. Physical inclemencies will slow down the remote viewing process. If you're hungry, if you have to go to the bathroom, if you're overly tired, if you have a bad cold, these are the kinds of conditions that we call physical inclemencies. And they will really affect your remote viewing session negatively. Other things that will have a negative impact and perhaps shut you down completely in remote viewing, particularly in the higher stages. If you've had alcoholic beverages within the last 12 hours, alcohol in your system, more than 2 drinks, you'll need 12 hours before you really can be effective in your remote viewing session. Marijuana, you'll need 30 days to clear your system if you've smoked marijuana. Marijuana lends itself to defocus. Marijuana will prevent you from focusing on a target. We have found that people that smoke marijuana enter stream of consciousness in stage 4, and they lose the target. They cannot focus on the target signal. What do we mean by target signal? We're capturing an impulse from the collective unconscious. This impulse is felt first by our autonomic nervous system, and then the perception is integrated in our bodies. Later on in this course, you'll have a lecture on how the signal is integrated into our body, our psyche, and how our psyche decides or judges the information and objectifies it in terms of words or sketches. When you work, you're going to work in a fairly sterile environment, a homogeneously colored room, gray flat table, dull colored walls, no pictures of no velvets of Elvis Presley or things I purchased in Tijuana. Those are in my house, but they're not here because that would distract you. And subliminally, you'll pick those things up as a new student. You won't do it when you're trained, but as a new student, you'll pick up subliminal things, accidentally integrate them into your remote viewing data. And we don't want to do that here. One of the big ones is a revolving thing, mechanical thing. If you are attempting the remote view, particularly as a new student, and if you're tired, if there's a dryer going on in your house anywhere, so the motion of going around and around, you'll find your hand on the paper going around and around in your sketch. There aren't too many things like that. I'll give you all the caveats, but that's what I mean about keeping the noise level down. We don't want to work you in a sterile environment totally. We don't want to put you in a sensory deprivation tank, an anechoic chamber, and things like that, because if you're taught to remote view under those conditions, you won't be able to come back out in the normal working world where you stop for lunch, clear your desk, and decide to look for Atlantis or the Lost Dutchman mine on lunch break. You won't be able to do it because the sounds of the normal everyday sounds, the ambient background noise will cause you to become upset and frustrated. So we'll train in a normal office environment. What we are doing in this intermediate module is extending our rudimentary skills beyond what you learned in the introductory tape, and that was to distinguish between gross geographical features, man-made cities, mountains, water bodies, and land bodies, to now look at targets that are a person or people, a place, a specific place, a specific thing, or a group of things, and an event. You'll be taught in this module how to accurately describe at a distance in time or space people, places, things, and events to gain very accurate information about these. Your job is to solve a problem, because that's what remote viewing is. It's a problem-solving tool, very powerful problem-solving tool. And I'll teach you how to use your unconscious, which I consider to be my best friend. It's also a master problem solver. It solves problems in a very elegant fashion, as long as we stay out of its way. This is more of a mind-body process than it is a mind process. In many stages in technical remote viewing, we use our bodies more than we do our minds. We're not observing anything. We're observers. But that is also a misnomer. We're really perceivers. And in fact, remote viewing, as I've mentioned before, is really a misnomer. It should be remote perception. But for historical reasons, we've kept the term as remote viewing. Remote viewing has a long, very interesting history, and we should not give short shrift to that history. Many people, giants in the field, have worked very hard to allow us to be where we are today. And that's why, as president of PSI TECH, I have not changed the terminology any more than I had to. I've kept the historical terms. So remote viewing stuck. So for each of these classes or categories of targets, each has its own identity in the collective unconscious. It exists as a pattern of information. That information is its identity. So once again, we're not connecting with nor experiencing the actual target as it exists in its material physical form somewhere in the universe, in time, space. We're simply going into its identity as a pattern of information in the collective unconscious.
So it's some kind of a signature.
It is indeed. It's a signature or a footprint that exists in all time and space. Nothing is lost in time and space. No events are lost. No information is lost. It's all there in a very dynamic way, as you'll find. This is not a static memory bank. So although I'll refer to the matrix or the collective unconscious as a library, I don't mean to suggest that it's a static field. It is not. The matrix is very dynamic indeed. It learns as we learn. It can teach us, and we can teach it, apparently. The original model suggests, the way that the discovery suggests, was that there is this collective unconscious. I'll model it this way for now, in a state-space sense. Actually, personally, I like to think of it as a single dimension. Just a single dimension. No time, no space, nothing. Just everything is just right there. All knowledge, all information is there. Sort of like static RAM, phonograph record, old photograph record, or a floppy disk. The information's there, but you can't get it out unless you put some type of movement through it, some kinesthetics to move it, spin it. If you're dealing with optical storage, you have to send light or laser through it to get the information patterns back out in a holographic sense. If, let's say, you exist as a pattern of information in this matrix, then your physical form, let's say your body, we've got you here when you're conceived and here when you die, when your physical body dies. That's you. That's your lifespan. So if it's static from a distance. If you stand back outside of space and time, mind is outside of space and time. There's no time and space. That can present some problems to us later on. We can get around, but right now it's important to realize that mind's outside of the space and time. When you remote view, if you're just given a blind target, as you'll see, you will not know where you are in space nor where you are in time. We have to take these. We have to take known things, standards that we're familiar with, conditioned standards, and apply them to the data to bracket ourselves in time and space and say, aha, this is a prairie in the northern hemisphere, planet Earth, 20th century. It takes some tools to match up against that so that we know where we are. Because you don't right away. There you are in space and time. And if we remote view you down here in our linear environment, in our linear world where time flows linearly, the question is, well, where do you want you? Where do we want to remote view you? Here at birth or somewhere in between? Or do we want to look at that whole string right there, your whole life? Has your MO changed since you've been a child? Or is it still the same? How do you view the world? How do you think the world views you? Those kinds of things. Or do we want to look at the moment in your life? The most significant moment in your life. We can do that. And that information resides in this matrix. When we attack a particular point on that target, theoretically, there is a signal that's produced. If we hold on to the signal, we call it a signal line. And in our model, we're decoding the signal and we're extracting information from it. Supposedly, information is modulated on the signal. So our conscious attention is to this ritual, this TRV ritual, which you're going to learn, which the collective understands. Our intent is to do something. The collective says, I recognize this ritual, I recognize what your intent is, I recognize where your attention is. Unconscious attention, which has a theory all its own, and it's real, turns itself to the target, the unconscious level. The target emanates a reflected signal. We perceive the signal, decode it, and then extract information from it. This tool is a transducer. We're transducing information that exists in the universe. There are lots of information out there, lots of patterns of information. Our minds, are transducing this information, converting it into words, written words, sketches, or the spoken word. The information goes directly from our mind to our brain. It appears as an idea first. So the idea of red is there first, and then we may or may not respond to the idea using a visual memory. We may be able to perceive the color red, but we receive it first as an idea, and then perceive it using our body's sensorium, our tool. So we're converting information, decoding it, and then perceiving it. We're not perceiving first. We're receiving first. The idea as information, and then the perception, and then its objectification on the paper as a written word or a sketch. That's what we're doing here. So when we probe the ideogram, or a blind person touches the ideogram, Essentially, their attention is turned to this specific area of focus right here. And a blind person will know, if they're very perceptive, that this is black, not because they're feeling vibrations or energy, but because their focus of attention is here, and they're picking up the idea of the way this exists as a pattern of information and the information about it. That information is going directly into their own mind, and then it's felt as a perception. The technical remote viewing structure that you'll learn, that we began to learn in the introductory module, is what keeps you on target. It's what ensures that the information that you produce in terms of words and sketches will be accurate and detailed. Structure requires that you be highly attentive and alert. This structure keeps our conscious mind busy so that it does not become involved in thinking about the data as the stream of data enters our conscious mind. We place each conscious thought connected with a target immediately on the paper in terms of a word or a sketch. We empty the hopper. We adjudicate all the information and concepts that come into our mind as it comes in. Once we attempt to interfere with this process, once we get thought process involved, if we start as remote viewers thinking about the data, our imaginations will take the signal away from us. We will lose the target. We'll lose access to the target information. So in essence, don't get involved in thinking about the data. Don't try to look at the meanings involved in the percepts that you're getting. There's no thinking allowed. We only want you to perceive. Once your session is complete, of course you're going to have to think. You'll put your thinking cap on, take your remote viewing hat off, and we'll ask you to analyze your data. Then we want you to think, but not during the process of remote viewing itself. In fact, the way that we gain closer contact with a target is to turn our attention, ever increasingly greater amounts of attention, to the task at hand. That requires will and effort. That's the kind of work that allows us to get closer to the target. I like to compare it with working a math problem. In fact, the more effort that we put into solving the problem, the more we become ensconced or lost in the problem, and the closer we get to a solution many times. It can be tiring times to remote view. We'll need to take breaks. I'll ask you to take a break at about 20 minutes into a 45-minute session. Take a break for 3 or 4 minutes. Stand up, stretch your legs, get the blood running again. Forget about the target. Come back and resume in the way that I'll teach you to resume. So breaks are necessary. It is a tiring process. It's best not to work more than twice a day. Even I, as a professional, never work more than twice a day, except in emergencies. I spend no more than, and if we work twice a day, we need to allow at least 2 hours between sessions. Because in many ways, we're still connecting with a pattern of information that's associated with our earlier target. When we talk about summarizing your data and reworking the target, I'll say more about that. I'd like to talk to you about how we actually begin our session, how we set up a target. And there's new important things to learn. And that's what we're going to do now. So these are your classes of targets. These are new classes of targets. How do we actually prepare to remote view, to use technical remote viewing skills to derive information about these types of targets? Well, we first create a target folder. At PSI TECH, we simply use a manila folder similar to this. And on that folder, on the tab, we write the name of the target. The most important part of setting up the problem is the name of the target. I cannot overemphasize this. The name must be unambiguous, it must be concise, and as simple as possible. I'll talk to you about this in a moment when we discuss queuing. But for now, the name of your target goes on your folder. After you place the name there, you should generate a set of random numbers the same way that we generated them in the first tape, in the introductory lesson. 4, 6, 2, 3, 7, 8, 1, 4. Any 2 4-digit numbers will do. It's irrelevant. These are simply random numbers. They have no bearing upon the targeting at all. They're simply for administrative purposes, and that is it. Now, if you would like to place reference material in the folder, you can do that. For instance, suppose my target were the Statue of Liberty in New York City, in the harbor. I might want to use this as a training project. I could place a photo of the Statue of Liberty in my targeting folder. That becomes target reference material. It's very important that you realize, however, that if you place reference material in the folder, it will influence the point of view, no pun intended, that your unconscious takes at the target. Let me say that again. If you place target reference material in your targeting folder, your mind will use that as a jump-off point to describe the target. You will not be remote viewing the reference material. Your mind will look at the reference material as a modification of the target requirement, and you will remote view from that camera angle. So, again, harking back to the Statue of Liberty as an example, if one is practicing against the Statue of Liberty and you take a photo of the Statue of Liberty, place it in your targeting file, then if that photo were taken, let's say, a year earlier, that would be the place in time that your mind would go, and that would be the perspective from whence the photo was taken, the photographer's angle. Your unconscious attention, because mind is outside of space and time, mind is immediately 1 year prior at the target and at the angle that the photographer took the photo. The descriptions that you perceive, your perceptions of the Statue of Liberty, will still be very correct, but they will apply to that moment in time and from that perspective in space if you place target reference material in your folder. This folder, as you remember from the introductory tape, is the only target folder that goes on the desk in front of you, the desk or table in front of you when you work. Make sure you have no other folders, target folders, on the desk when you work. If you do, you may morph or combine elements of more than one target into your session.
What about other objects? Coffee cups, vases, flowers, whatever?
And as an unskilled viewer, a viewer who is learning remote viewing, it's best to keep the table clear of objects. Otherwise, subliminally, out of the corner of your eye, so to speak, you may, in your sketches, in your stage 3 sketches, include things that are on the table, outlines and abstract sketches.
Cylindrical objects.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
They may end up in your sketch as well as the actual target data, the remote target data.
So that folder, what is written on that folder, that is preeminent. That takes...
Yes, exactly right. What the name of the target takes precedence over everything else, including your intent, including anything else. The name comes first. That is what takes precedence. Your mind is going to look at the idea that's represented by that name. Your mind will take the idea represented by the name and find that, or the next best thing, and I'll talk about that in a moment, in this collective unconscious library. Now, what happens if the name has no concomitant in the collective unconscious? Think of an analogy. Let me use an analogy. If you, the remote viewer, come to me, the librarian in the collective unconscious, with a request for a book, and that request says Statue of Liberty, I can go and find a number of books on the Statue of Liberty, and I'm going to give you, and your unconscious mind will perceive, elements of the actual Statue of Liberty. But if you come to me with a request for the Statue of Liberty, let's say, in the year 1000, I have no book that matches your request. There was no Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor in the year 1000. Now what do? I, the librarian, come to you with the next best thing, a stack of other books talking to you about New York Harbor as it existed in the year 1000. I come to you with a set of books, and in that stack of books is New York Harbor, or what is today New York Harbor in the year 1000. The Statue of Liberty, the way it is today. Then your unconscious mind must adjudicate that data. And what you will get, because that's a nonsense cue, in your stage 3 sketch, is a sketch of a water body, and that's all. That's your unconscious way of telling you that something is wrong with your search term. And on that note, let me introduce the idea of cueing, setting up the problem. You'll hear me often talk, and you will use the word the cue. The subject is cueing. What do I mean by the cue? The cue is essentially the matrix search parameter, or parameters. How do you spell that? I'm just kidding. Or a better way to say it is the matrix search terms. The target is the actual remote viewing thing. What you are remote viewing is the target. The pattern of information, the specific point of reference in the collective unconscious, a pattern is what we call the target. Right? The cue is the word that we write down. It's the name of that particular, how we refer to that pattern of information. How we refer to that information is an idea. Ideas are represented by words. We write the word down. The word is translated by our minds, and our unconscious mind, back into an abstract idea, and it's that idea that is sought out in the collective unconscious. The word becomes the cue. So, if as a training target or just as an item of interest, I wanted to look at the person, George Washington, Here's my target, a person. Cut and dry. Just keep in mind, however, a couple of things. I have not dictated to my personal unconscious how, where, and when to perceive my target. My mind will come into the target in any place, using any tact or stratagem that it chooses at any time in this person's life, from birth to death. This is George Washington's timeline. So, if George Washington becomes my target and I am remote viewing him, my mind can pick up this man any point in time in this man's life. Be aware of that. So when we do that, if we don't know, and mind is outside of time, so we're not going to know where we are in this person's life until we begin to describe him in higher stages as a young adult, as an older man, as a child. Then we can move from that point to the left, the past in his life, or forward in his life, and explore his life using this simple search term. Notice that I created this cue. I, Ed Dames, chose George Washington. So, collective unconscious in that library is going to pick out some books. There have been any number of George Washington's people with this name in history and alive today, probably. However, in my mind, the creator, my intent was the former president, the first president of the United States, that particular George Washington. And that, now, my intent acts to modify my search term. On the other hand, if I chose Mickey Mouse as my target, what does this target represent? It represents an abstract idea. And remote viewers and a single remote viewer, every time they work this, will be in a different place. They will find themselves all over the place, using our vernacular. Because Mickey Mouse is an abstract idea, meaning many different things to many different people. The creator, the animator, the person who enjoys watching cartoons, each person in the collective unconscious perceives this target in a different way. The collective unconscious has many different points to choose from. George Washington was unique in time and space. Unequivocal, unambiguous target, and therefore your data will be unambiguous if you stay in remote viewing structure. What you can use, what you can build into your problem, and it will work for you right now, in terms of time, a time fix. The collective unconscious, the matrix understands this, present. It understands that. It understands next. Okay? It understands future. And it understands past.
Next, you mean like the next incident?
Yes, a next event on a timeline. Let's say to the right by convention is the future, and this is the past. Present somewhere here. In advanced stages of TRV, you're going to be able to locate yourself on this timeline. But time is a very abstract thing. Yes, it's real, but it's very abstract. You can't grab it. So we're already on shaky ground. Where we work best in TRV is against physical things, because we're physical guys, physical world. The better way to look at this, the better way to look at a timeline is to call it an event line, because time has no meaning to our minds. There's no meaning unless there's events. This event happened here, And it can be characterized by a lot of people sitting around signing a declaration. After that came another event where a bunch of men with rifles were attacking other people who were wearing red coats. After that was this event, and this event, and this event. All registered in the collective in different places. It's very much like memory, and actually in the human brain, the physical human brain. You've got bits and pieces that are, the idea of a coffee cup. The idea of smelling coffee is registered in one place. The idea of a cup is somewhere else. The idea of a handle is somewhere else. And you have to pull all those things together to say, coffee cup. The coffee cup just isn't in one place, in a discrete place in the brain. It's distributed all over the place as a pattern that we have to put together. Our operating system has to put it together. So look at this more as an event line than a timeline. Events. The concatenation of events. Then we can bracket an event. We can say, hey, I'm interested in this event right here, which I've described one way, and I can begin to bracket it by known things. The next presidential election, which is already out there somewhere. The outcome may not be, but the event is, or this or that. There are other ways to calibrate this timeline that you're going to learn. We can calibrate the event line using either physical events or emotional events or physical events. Nothing abstract, though. Abstracts don't work. The idea of January 22nd, 1999 is not out there, because this isn't a timeline, it's an event line. There's no event called January 22nd. There is a presidential election, which is a physical event, maybe. There is a emotional event called your birthday or Christmas, depending on whether it's emotional to you or someone else. Those are the kinds of things you'll learn how to do to calibrate and develop an index with this event line to know where you are in space and time. Let's talk about both a person and an event. Let's say John F. Kennedy. In this case, I have chosen this man as a target. But that is not my target. My target becomes a point in time. I want to remote view this person at the moment of his death. So instead of looking at this person's life anywhere from birth to death, my unconscious no longer has a choice. It's constrained by the search term, so modified by this. Death. This man, modified by this idea, this becomes, death is an event. But be careful. Here's some things that can complicate the idea. In the collective unconscious, is this term death as both an event and a state of being. The same way that an encyclopedia would define death as both an event and a state of being. So to be on the safe side, I suggest that you ask yourself, if you had an encyclopedia in front of you with all the different kinds of things that you're looking for, those different ideas, think about searching an encyclopedia. Use an encyclopedic search term. You can be very specific or you can be very general. Here we're relatively general in terms of John F. Kennedy. Now we've specified a point, in this case an event. We are not interested in state of death. In fact, that is a very high-level esoteric topic that will be covered in advanced specialized series of modules.
How do you decide when to make it really general versus really specific?
If your search term is general, a general search term, you get lots of data. If you have a specific search term, You get only a little bit of data. Let's say I'm looking at the idea of global deforestation. Whether I'm in a library here on the ground or I'm in the collective unconscious, there's a plethora of details on global deforestation. I could conduct hundreds and hundreds of TRV sessions and still not exhaust the supply of information on global deforestation. In this case, perhaps I'm interested in not global deforestation, but Peru, the country of Peru. Is this known in the collective unconscious, Peru? It is. The country and the idea of Peru has been in the collective unconscious long enough to leave a mark, and so the collective recognizes it. Peru, deforestation, that's more specific. But what does deforestation mean? By lightning, by fires, or by man? This has to be defined. If you've ever used an encyclopedia or an automated database, this collective unconscious stores material, stores information in a very similar way, almost exactly the same way that a library stores information, from the general to the specific. As a newly trained remote viewer, don't expect to take a front-loaded target, particularly a person or a place or a thing or an object, that you know and be able to work it effectively. I can't think of anything more difficult for a new remote viewer than to do that, to attempt to remote view a thing that you already know. Your skills are not in place enough to do that. Only someone with advanced TRV skills can tackle a complete known and gain additional information on it. So I would not suggest that you try to do that. Use this tool to solve problems, to solve for unknowns. What is at a place? Who is at a place? What kind of event is this? What is happening? What happened? Total unknowns. That way, your unconscious is forced to do all the work. And it's much easier for your consciousness not to get involved with this data because it's coming to you in the blind. It's all new data. It's just too difficult to try to cope with data that you're already familiar with. Don't do that until you're an advanced technical remote viewer. Use this for unknown. There's a lot to cover, a lot of ground to cover, a lot of new things to learn, far more than in the introductory module. But before we move on, I'd like to perform a quick review. And before I give you a quick review, I want to mention one more thing. The most common error as a technical remote viewer is shortcuts. There's a lot of work to do in this process. It's fascinating, it can be an adventure, but sometimes it can be drudge work. Don't be tempted to take a shortcut. Stay in structure, step by step, closer and closer target contact, and don't take shortcuts. They'll cost you. They'll cost you a lot of data, and you may not be able to analyze your work correctly because you won't have enough information, or you will have lost the target completely. Stay in structure. You'll remember in stage 1, I'll call it S1 to abbreviate, we had contact with the target as a gestalt of information. And our autonomic nervous system, our body's response to the gestalt, the way that the pattern of information was received as a signal, a compressed data signal by our bodies, was an ideogram. Our ideograms were standard ideograms. They conformed to certain classes of targets. You remember that we had this ideogram for mountain, this one for land, a wavy across for water, and a right angle for a man-made structure. Several variations on these themes. All ideograms require decoding. We must perceive the motion and the feeling. And nothing is more important to this process than correctly discerning motion and feeling. So we'll talk about this periodically in the intermediate stages as well as the advanced stages. There are 11 standard ideograms. One might say that the universe breaks out to 11 different gestalts and then goes from there to an infinite number of permutations, infinite variability. And they look like this. In other words, most people on a bell curve, the way that these ideograms are produced, they appear to meet standard procedure. They're standard in nature. Standard ideograms look like this. I'm going to give you all 11 right now. There are non-standard ideograms also. It's important to realize that the ideogram itself, the appearance of the ideogram, is not important. We should not attempt, when we produce it, and you will, you should not attempt to analyze it or contemplate it. There are other things that you must do as soon as you produce the ideogram. But if you're lucky enough to produce a standard ideogram, it becomes a real aid to analysis, to data analysis, quickly in the TRV process. 1. Just like that. They're produced about a third of a second. Very quickly. This is land. Two. Water. Now, later on, you'll get this ideogram for any type of liquid. But this is the archetypical ideogram. This represents a gestalt, generally in the human environment of water. In any form, left to right, top to bottom, this is man-made structure. Notice the right angle. The change in the direction of the line is very important. I'll get to the reasons why in a moment when we talk about decoding the ideograms and what exactly that means. Mountain. These are gestalts, remember. So when I say man-made structure, this is the ideogram that you're going to get for both anything that's man-made, whether it's this pen or a city, it's still the same thing in terms of the gestalt, a pattern of information. The way the pattern starts out as a fuzzy thought ball, and it breaks out into the detail later. Same thing with mountain. This could be a single large mountain or a mountain range. The gestalt's the same. It's the same thing. Will we know later? Absolutely. Absolutely. But this is how it starts. This jump starts the process. Here's another. This, called the loop, is a life form. A life form, either a living thing, usually not a plant. A plant will take on another ideogrammatic form. A life form of an animal could even be a microorganism, or the semblance of life, a statue, a bust, a mannequin that will still give you this. You will not know until stage 3, which comes in about 5 to 7 minutes later, whether you're dealing with a living thing or the semblance of a living thing. Okay? That's the pattern, the beginning pattern that's embedded in the collective unconscious. 6. This is usually a large circular feature, and that's what it is. A large circle that's produced that rapidly. A large circular feature. So it could be a sphere as well as a circle, but things like this could be a planet, an island, a lake or a pond, a Ferris wheel, will produce that kind of an ideogram. We'll have a lot more to say about these later, but these are how they present right off the bat. We'll know what we're dealing with if we produce standard ideograms very, very quickly, if they conform to the standard. Energy. A lightning storm, a linear accelerator target, an explosion, energetic. The motion. Motion has its own gestalt, usually represented by a long, fast line that peters out, fades off across the paper, and this can be in any direction. Many times motion and energy are combined in a multiple ideogram, and we'll talk about those momentarily. 9. That. Just a dot. And that is the vacuum of space, underwater, or inside any material matrix. So, if I were to place a student's mind inside of a table or a piece of granite rock, many times you'll get this dot as a simple ideogram. That's all. 10. Activity is the name we give it. When a group of people or life forms are bunched together, a flock of sheep or a crowd of people at a football game in a stadium, when they're shoulder to shoulder, they no longer produce a life form ideogram. They produce an ideogram that looks like this. Very often this ideogram is decoded incorrectly. We'll get into what that might mean later. But that's what it looks like. If you get an ideogram like that, you can suspect that you have what we call activity. A group of people in motion. And the last one. Life or death. This is called a loop, and this is designated as an inverse loop. When you produce an ideogram like that on paper, you're probably dealing with matters of life or death at any level. So, for instance, If we were to look for a missing person, and instead of producing this ideogram, we produce this ideogram here, that bodes ill for the person's existence. It may be that they've already died or are in the process of dying. Sometimes this isn't the case, but many times it is. So this is, although a remote viewing session is about an hour long, we can tell right off the bat what's going on if you're a trained remote viewer. These are the 11 standard ideograms. There are 2 other archetypical forms that look like ideograms but do not present in stage 1. They present in stage 3. These are not ideograms, but you'll sketch them in stage 3 where we do sketching. One of them is a zigzag form, and that is usually some type of energy in motion. Another is this. It starts out as a spiral. A spiral is a helix. A helix either starting here or starting from the top down. This is not an ideogram, but it's an archetypical symbol that deals with spiritual things. The departure of a soul from a dying human being. A monastery in the wilderness. You will see these kinds of archetypical symbols that you'll spontaneously draw, although not as fast as a real ideogram. Your body will produce these in response to let's call it the spiritual signal line. And one more, very rare, a fairly universal symbol, at least in the last century, mathematically, for infinity. This is very rare in remote viewing. When you run up against it, it's only in a few unique cases, very unique cases, that deal with matters of both spirituality as well as life and death, usually over time. And I won't get into that now. That's advanced stuff. But these are not ideograms. They appear as sketched symbols in stage 3. Sometimes they're mistaken as ideograms. You won't see them normally in stage 1. So back to the 11 standard ideograms. It appears that in terms of the TRV universe, that all things, no matter what you're dealing with, begin as one of those 11 gestalts, and then they break out into infinite amount of detail. Things begin as a gestalt, then we go from the gestalt to the general, to the specific, to the detailed. We need more time on target to do that. Okay? Decoding the ideogram. It turns out that your ideograms don't have to be standard. They can look like anything, as long as they're produced rapidly enough, and they're spontaneous. They're spontaneously generated in about 1/3 of a second. Now, that might be a mountain, or it could be water, we're not sure. Now, if this were a standard ideogram, then I could pretty much say that this would be a hill or a mountain, but we really don't know. Don't eyeball the ideogram. Don't attempt to analyze it, and don't contemplate it. Move immediately to decoding the ideogram. And by that I mean we're attempting to determine the ideogram's motion first. By motion, I mean the following. What was the sense that you got when you produced the ideogram on paper? What was the sense of motion? And we want to decode the ideogram. Every single line segment of the ideogram, the motion must be decoded correctly. So in this case, I'll ask myself, and I can retrace the ideogram in the air, right above this, a couple of times if I need to. What did I do? What did my body feel like? What was the sense that I got of motion? I felt myself, and this really is a felt feeling, I felt myself moving diagonally up. And I'll write that down. You can abbreviate, diagonal up. Then what did I do? Curving over. Vertical down. And diagonal curving across. This is what I mean by decoding the ideogram's motion. It's a felt sense. It's as if your body were moving along the profile of the target that way. And then we want to do one more thing. We want to investigate the ideogram's feeling. The motion and the feeling. By feeling, I mean the following. I'm going to ask you to hold your pen like this and to touch the line itself for about 2 seconds. You're going to be able to deduce the way the ideogram feels using one of 6 descriptors. The descriptors are on your checklist. Don't use any other descriptors. They'll get you into trouble. You don't know that much about it. And the descriptors are the following. Does it feel hard, soft? These are on your checklist, by the way. That checklist that you have. Does it feel hard, soft, liquid, airy, semi-soft, or semi-hard? Just those words. No others at this point. That's what we mean by feeling. This is a little bit tricky at first. Not hard and soft necessarily, but the other ideas of airy and liquid are sometimes difficult to discern. And you may need a couple of days, perhaps 3 or 4, before this really gets in. But it doesn't matter. It's the work that's involved in doing it that matters, in trying your best to decode that ideogram. Because, as you'll find, luckily, technical remote viewing is a self-correcting process. If you're working hard and you're staying within the protocols and you're doing your best, any mistakes you make will be corrected by the process itself. And you'll still get the target, as we are so loath to say, but you'll still describe the target correctly, in spite of yourself. It's because the process is self-correcting. It's self-correcting in the following analogous manner. If I'm moving down a fast-moving river toward my destination, occasionally I might get caught up, my boat and I, in an eddy, a side eddy, a small current over here near the banks. And if I don't do any work, I'll be stuck in this eddy. But if I do some work to get back into the stream, I'm back in the stream and I'm moving again. I'm moving down the river. I may get caught in a few more eddies, but the technical remote viewing process, analogously, has ways of bouncing you back out of those eddies or ruts and getting you back onto the path again and keeping you moving. The process itself does that. So you don't have to fear about losing the target. This was not true in 15 years ago. We were not sure if we lost the target or not. We could be sure that our imagination many times was not overlaying our data, but we weren't quite sure if we lost target contact. That's not the case anymore. You don't have to worry about that in technical remote viewing. These 2 things are necessary. Get this right. Get the motion and the feeling right in your ideogram. And I'm going to ask you to produce that ideogram 2 or 3 times before we move on to stage 2. If you reproduce the ideogram and it's very different, that means you decoded the first one completely correctly. You got both the feeling and the motion correct. So, if I produce that and I decode this as curving up, curving over, diagonal down, and horizontal across, and in fact, that is incorrect, that's actually a sloppy angle, a 90-degree angle, and I did not say vertical up, angle, horizontal across. We just slopped that down on a piece of paper. This ideogram, the way that I produced it the first time, will come back almost identically. The ideogram comes back looking almost identical to the way it did before for standard ideograms. Then you decoded either the feeling, the motion, or both incorrectly on the first ideogram. If this goes away and you get a new ideogram, then this was decoded correctly. There's more to this, to stage one, that you'll need to know. For instance, usually, if we're solving a problem, the first ideogram is the key solution. So, if there's an explosion outside, and I have no idea what caused the explosion, and we use that event, the explosion, as a target, and we're looking for the source of the event, and my ideogram is this first, QED, that's the life form. We've got a life form, probably a human being, or a group of human beings that caused the explosion, as opposed to this, a structure as a source or the origin of as a source of the explosion or the cause, a broken, a generator blowing up, or a car overheating, or something like that, initiating an explosion right off the bat. A multiple ideogram is very, very common. More often than not, your ideograms, I'd say probably 2/3 of the time, you'll be dealing with multiple ideograms. By multiple, I mean something like this, where my first, and you'll need to be able to break these out, to separate one gestalt from the other. So I want you to place, to determine where one gestalt ends in terms of its ideogrammatic representation and the other begins. Here, probably right there. And so I'm dealing with, and just do your best, I'm dealing here with, now notice how I drew this. I drew it that way, it looks that way on paper. Don't look at it, retrace it. Retrace it and capture the feeling. In fact, this is horizontal, across, angle, and by angle I mean right angle. Anything else is a peak. We'll get into that later. Angle, vertical down. What's the feeling? It's hard. So we're probably dealing with a man-made structure. So this part of the ideogram is man-made. And over here, is this 2 or is it 1? It appears to be 1. Simply wavy across. And it's liquid. I still have a problem discerning soft from liquid, and it's no problem. It will go away. I just have to make sure I don't, in my mind, turn this into a forest that's soft and wavy. If I get that idea, I do something with the idea that we'll talk about later. Stage one, all stage one is, Gestalt contact, is our foot in the door. We've got something. Down in this deep, murky, unconscious, we've got our hand on something, we have no idea what it is. Now we may have a certain idea, though, if we produce standard ideograms. If we're lucky enough to produce standard ideograms, my ideograms are standard. Surprisingly, I think surprisingly, that non-standard ideograms are produced by people with natural talent, who are naturally psychic. People who are naturally psychic many times produce non-standard ideograms. They also have looser control of their structure, need to be reined in much tighter. If they toe the line, they can become very good remote viewers. But what they lose is they lose a little bit of an analytical clue in that their initial ideograms are not standard. Nine 804-3241.
Diagonal, down, peak, angle, curving up, curving around, looping up, looping over, curving over, and down. Semi-hard. Again.
9804 3241.
Diagonal, down, peak, curving up, curving over, wavy across, soft. One more time.
Okay. 9, 8, 0, 4, 3, 2, 4, 1.
Diagonal, down, peak, curving up, curving around, angle, diagonal up, hard, S2s.
After we take the target reference numbers a couple of times and produce the ideogram 2 or 3 times and decode it, that gives us nice contact, very much like digging a hole into which we pour the foundation for a building. Stage 1 is like that, analogously, digging a hole for a foundation. Stage 2 is laying the foundation, laying the concrete. S2 is sensory contact. I'm going to use the terms target and site synonymously for a little while longer, and then we'll make a discrimination between them in stage 3. Sensory target contact. Here, our mind is bouncing around the target area or the site, exploring it for sensory impressions. But we are going to dictate the way in which it does it. We're going to impose an order as part of TRV structure, an order on the way that unconscious explores using sensory impressions, explores the target area. We're going to first demand to know what colors are present at the site. What textures, what smells and tastes, temperatures, and sounds, including onomatopoetic sounds, bang, bang, clang, clang, tinkle, tinkle. Dimensions. These are all important. The dimensions. If we have, having 3 or 4 dimensions, I'll explain what I mean about dimensions in a moment. Having 3 or 4 percepts, dimensional percepts, mean that you've got quite a degree of target contact, that we're ready to move on to something else. So these are self-explanatory. And the pace and the cadence at which they're produced is very metronomic. You'll notice that stage 1, you'll notice in a little while that stage 1 is very rapid. Ideograms produced rapidly, you don't dally, you just go in there and the viewer decodes the motion feeling and moves on to stage 2. Stage 2 is a little bit slower, but still in a metronomic fashion. We're going to ask, what colors? Well, there's blue, yellow, chartreuse, a little silver. There's a pause. That pause lasts more than 3 or 4 seconds. Move on to the next category of textures, because that pause is important. That kind of pause is very, very important to the work that we do. A moment of time for a human being is generally about 3 seconds. We divide our linear time, our reality, our sense of what our experience is, up into packets of about 3 seconds each. And we integrate what goes on in those 3-second packets to be able to say, a moment ago, I was talking about textures and colors, or metronomic pace. That's how we do that. So, if we need to integrate data in 3-second packets, creative imagination does the same thing too. If we're moving through this checklist faster than 4 seconds, from moment to moment, that means we're moving faster than creative imagination can supply us with data. Every time creative imagination begins to put a package together, analytically or otherwise, it has to drop it and abandon it because we've moved on to something else, to another area. Okay? Smells, tastes, temperatures, all these words are on your checklist. Please use it in the first several days. Sounds and dimensions. And by dimensions, we're looking for 4 classes of dimensions. The first one are verticals, horizontals, diagonals, and masses and densities. So, by this I mean, this is more than through a lens darkly. You have no idea where you're at. You're in this dark, murky soup somewhere. You're being asked to perceive something. And what I'm saying here is after we've explored the site and ordered the information in terms of how senses were perceived, what kind of verticals are around you? What kind of this is around you? Mind knows this. Is there something around you that's high and tall, low and squat, narrow and thin? How about horizontals? Is where you're at, and this is a piece of cake, folks, so don't worry about it. I know the fear of failure is here, but that's just something you'll have to deal with it. That's your problem. It's not a problem for me because I know you'll be over it like that. This is very, very automatic. Mind knows these things. Is your target inside or outside? Is it open and vast, low, long and narrow? We know these kinds of things automatically. Mind knows this. We just don't have to do it day to day because we have other things to do. Shopping, laundry, driving the car somewhere. Diagonals, as I've mentioned in the past, diagonals are very, very unique in nature. That's why mountains is the answer to what is the most easiest remote viewing target. The easiest thing to remote view is a mountain. It's big and it's got diagonals. Unique diagonals. Diagonals are unique in nature. Mind will always be attracted to the novelty. And masses and densities. Is whatever you're perceiving light, thick, heavy, hollow, thin, airy, dense, solid, bulky, huge, big, large? That's what we mean by masses and densities. And there's no creative imagination needed. There's a checklist right there. Go right through the list. Multiple choice, no problem. Even a child could do it. And there are other behavioral things that you should be doing. Your pen should be very close to that paper. It should not be up here. And the worst thing you could possibly do is to do this. Because that means not only is the pen off the paper and you're not attaining to the flow, but where are you? You're in your mind instead of in the matrix. You see eyeballs go up in the head. That means you're starting to think. So you're starting to decide. I hear people say, well, I can't decide. I said, decide means you're thinking. You just go there. You're perceiving. Don't think, perceive. This is a perception process. If your target, let's say, would be an open body of water, okay, for here, we might have, it would either be fresh or salty, brackish, chemical, pungent, rancid. Something would be there. Perhaps fresh smells, fresh taste. Textures, liquid or wet is a common one. Okay? Colors, whatever the colors are. Brown if it's brackish, blue, turquoise. Could be white if you're dealing with a shoreline, but that would be an interface of two gestalts, land and water. Temperatures, whatever the temperature is. Ambient for the air, cold for the water, warm for the water. What your unconscious is doing is bouncing around the site. It's taking a color here, a color there, a texture here, a texture there. That will not be the case in stage 4. But in stage 2 it is. Think of a spider trying to weave a web. Spider webs are intricate and beautiful, aesthetically, works of art. But for the spider to first weave the web, it's got to get a foothold here and a handhold there, any place that it can, before it starts weaving this intricate web. That's stage 2, the stage 2 process. For your sounds, it could be rushing, splashing, something like that. Or no sounds at all. But for dimensions, you have to get dimensions. In fact, you must get 3 or 4. You must have 3 or 4 dimensions in this process. So in case of water, it could be open, vast, wide, outside, low, wavy. That's more than 3. Any 3 will do. That's enough contact to move on to the next thing. The next thing has nothing to do with the data at all. It has nothing to do with data connected with your target. It has to do with the way you feel about it. And that we call an AI, an aesthetic impact. By the time we declare 3 or 4 dimensions, when we objectify the data, we're getting this data that comes in. Remember now, these are percepts. They have no name. They're things that come in as ideas. They come in, we have to search. We perceive something in a right brain sense. We go to our linear left brain, the one that linearizes our life, whether it's speaking, the concatenation of subject, verb, or object in time, those kind of things. We go there and we look for a label to hang on to this percept. And we choose one. Where is that done, by the way? Where are the words that I'm speaking right now coming from? At what level? Am I choosing them? No. I'm outspeaking my thinking. But there is analysis going on at the pre-conscious level. There is analysis going on. I'm choosing. Why did I just say choose instead of select? There's a selector, a mechanism that grabbed the word for me, and this is done at the pre-conscious level. That's the level that's searching for labels to put on these percepts. It hangs a label on. In a tachistoscopic sense, we go back into the right brain, grab another percept, go back to the left brain, hang a label. Right brain, hang a label. That's why we're conscious when we do this. We're not in an altered state. We're very alert, as a matter of fact. We're listening to, we're grabbing that little unconscious signal, finding a label. Unconscious signal, finding a label. I know there's a lot of angst here, but once this kicks in, one of the most common things you'll see in this process is when somebody learns stages 1, 2, and 3, for instance, after they've got it down, which only takes a couple of days, they say, yeah, it's nothing. Anybody can do it. They really give short shrift to it. It's as if they've been doing it all their life. Aesthetic impact. After you perceive 3 or 4 dimensions and you objectify them in terms of writing the word down, the word that stands for the idea, I want you to go inside of yourself for a moment and then ask this question: how does the site at this juncture, end of the stage 2 list, how does the site make me feel? What am I feeling about the site? The reason that, and that feeling will really have nothing to do with the reality of what that is, will have nothing to do with the way you would really feel if you were at the site. It's actually junk, but we need to dump it so it doesn't start getting in the way. It doesn't start overlaying the objective nature of the data. We have to remain unbiased. And our own feelings, if they start to pop up, our judgments that convert themselves to feelings, you got to get them out of the way. I've seen people actually break down and cry running remote viewing sessions, but they were crying about imagination. They believed they were working something else. They had already lost the target. And I let them entertain their imagination and show them how careful you must be to get rid of your own feelings. They're trash at this juncture. Later on, that won't be the case. Later on in stage 4. Okay? Go in, ask yourself at this point, how does this site make me feel? Go in and take a dipstick, put it inside and say, well, I'm interested. And a little anxious. Or whatever. The words on this list in stage 2, all the sensory impressions, they represent about 80% nominally of all the words, all the responses to percepts, sensory percepts, that I've observed in the last 14 or 15 years of teaching. So it's not just a willy-nilly random list. I want you to wean yourself away from the list later on, but right now, there's something there that will fit at this early juncture.
It's two. Blue, orange, purple, white. Textures, mottled, rough, smooth, hard, metallic,
Smells and tastes.
sweet, aromatic, bitter, temperatures, warm, dimensions, sounds, clanging, voices, dimensions, round, oval, diagonal, curved, angled, edged, vast, under, shallow. AI, interesting. S3.
remote viewing is a scientifically repeatable problem-solving process done by a person to gain information about a specific target. A person, place, thing, or event, anywhere in time, past, present, or future.
This tape is the PRV intermediate skills. That's what we're learning here today. But I do want to review some of the basics. What do I mean by the basics? The basic is technical remote viewing is a skill. It's not meant to be an experience. It's an attention management skill. When we remote view, when we engage in a remote viewing session, about 45 minutes in duration fashion, as long as we stay out of its way. This is more of a mind-body process than it is a mind process. In many stages in technical remote viewing, we use our bodies more than we do our minds. We're not observing anything. We're observers. But that is also a misnomer. We're really perceivers. And in fact, remote viewing, as I've mentioned before, is really a misnomer. It should be remote perception. But for historical reasons, we've kept the term as remote viewing. Remote viewing has a long, very interesting history, and we should not give short shrift to that history. Many people, giants in the field, have worked very hard to allow us to be where we are today. And that's why, as president of PSI TECH, I have not changed the terminology any more than I had to. I've kept the historical terms. So remote viewing stuck. So for each of these classes or categories of targets, each has its own identity in the collective unconscious. It exists as a pattern of information. That information is its identity. So once again, we're not connecting with nor experiencing the actual target as it exists in its material physical form somewhere in the universe, in time-space. We're simply going into its identity as a pattern of information in the collective unconscious.
So it's some kind of a signature.
It is indeed. It's a signature or a footprint that exists in all time and space. Nothing is lost in time and space. No events are lost. No information is lost. It's all there in a very dynamic way, as you'll find. This is not a static memory bank. So although I'll refer to the matrix or the collective unconscious as a library, I don't mean to suggest that it's a static field. It is not. The matrix is very dynamic indeed. It learns as we learn. It can teach us, and we can teach it, apparently. The original model suggests, the way that the discovery suggests, was that there is this collective unconscious. I'll model it this way for now, in a state-space sense. I like to, actually, personally, I like to think of it as a single dimension. Just a single dimension. No time, no space, nothing. Just everything is just right there. All knowledge, all information is there. Sort of like static RAM. Phonograph record, old photograph record, or a floppy disk. The information is there, but you can't get it out unless you put some type of movement through it, some kinesthetics to move it, spin it. If you're dealing with optical storage, you have to send light or laser through it to get the information patterns back out in a holographic sense. If, let's say, you exist as a pattern of information in this matrix, then your physical form, let's say your body, we've got you here when you're conceived and here when you die, when your physical body dies. That's you. That's your lifespan. So if it's static from a distance. If you stand back outside of space and time, mind is outside of space and time. There's no time and space. That can present some problems to us later on. We can get around, but right now it's important to realize that mind's outside of the space and time. When you remote view, If you're just given a blind target, as you'll see, you will not know where you are in space nor where you are in time. We have to take we have to take known things, standards that we're familiar with, conditioned standards, and apply them to the data to bracket ourselves in time and space and say, aha, this is a prairie in the northern hemisphere, planet Earth, 20th century. It takes some tools to match up against that so that we know where we are. Because you don't right away. There you are in space and time. And if we remote view you down here in our linear environment, in our linear world where time flows linearly, the question is, well, where do you want you? Where do we want to remote view you? Here at birth or somewhere in between? Or do we want to look at that whole string right there, your whole life? Has your MO changed since you've been a child? Or is it still the same? How do you view the world? How do you think the world views you? Those kinds of things. You know? Or do we want to look at the moment in your life? You know, the most significant moment in your life. We can do that. And that information resides in this matrix. When we attack a particular point on that target, we want to try to construct an environment that lends itself toward the remote viewing process. So try to find a place where you're not disturbed for not be disturbed for 45 minutes. There's something else that's important in a remote viewing session, and that is this. There are things that we call physical inclemencies. Physical inclemencies will slow down the remote viewing process. If you're hungry, if you have to go to the bathroom, if you're overly tired, if you have a bad cold, these are the kinds of conditions that we call physical inclemencies. And they will really affect your remote viewing session negatively. Other things that will have a negative impact and perhaps shut you down completely in remote viewing, particularly in the higher stages. If you've had alcoholic beverages within the last 12 hours, alcohol in your system, more than 2 drinks, you'll need 12 hours before you really can be effective in your remote viewing session. Marijuana, you'll need 30 days to clear your system if you've smoked marijuana. Marijuana lends itself to defocus. Marijuana will prevent you from focusing on a target. We have found that people that smoke marijuana enter stream of consciousness in stage 4, and they lose the target. They cannot focus on the target signal. What do we mean by target signal? We're capturing an impulse from the collective unconscious. This impulse is felt first by our autonomic nervous system, and then the perception is integrated in our bodies. Later on in this course, you'll have a lecture on how the signal is integrated into our body, our psyche, and how our psyche decides or judges the information and objectifies it in terms of words or sketches. When you work, you're going to work in a fairly sterile environment. Homogeneously colored room, gray flat table, dull colored walls, no pictures of no velvets of Elvis Presley or things I purchased from Tijuana. Those are in my house, but they're not here because that would distract you. And subliminally, you'll pick those things up as a new student. You won't do it when you're trained, but as a new student, you'll pick up subliminal things, accidentally integrate them into your remote viewing data. And we don't want to do that here. One of the big ones is a revolving thing, mechanical thing. If you are attempting the remote view, particularly as a new student, and if you're tired, if there's a dryer going on in your house anywhere, so the motion of going around and around, you'll find your hand on the paper going around and around in your sketch. There aren't too many things like that. I'll give you all the caveats, but that's what I mean about keeping the noise level down. We don't want to work you in a sterile environment totally. We don't want to put you in a sensory deprivation tank, an anechoic chamber, and things like that, because if you're taught to remote view under those conditions, you won't be able to come back out in the normal working world where you stop for lunch, clear your desk, and decide to look for Atlantis or the Lost Dutchman mind on lunch break, you won't be able to do it because the sounds of the normal everyday sounds, the ambient background noise will cause you to become upset and frustrated. So we'll train in a normal office environment. What we are doing in this intermediate module is extending our rudimentary skills beyond what you learned in the introductory tape, and that was to distinguish between gross geographical features, man-made cities, mountains, water bodies, and land bodies, to now look at targets that are a person or people, a place, a specific place, a specific thing, or a group of things, and an event. You'll be taught in this module how to accurately describe at a distance in time or space people, places, things, and events to gain very accurate information about these. Your job is to solve a problem, because that's what remote viewing is. It's a problem-solving tool, very powerful problem-solving tool. And I'll teach you how to use your unconscious, which I consider to be my best friend. It's also a master problem solver. It solves problems in a very elegant